You fill a two-dimensional array, one of the most common things you'll do is you'll try to find a total value of points for each row, for each student. In other words, if I have this 2D array filled up, I want to add the contents of each cell for the row. So I want to add up these 4 cells for the first student. And then what I could do is maybe find his average or something. So in order to sum a row, here's what you have to do. You create a variable called total, and then after the for loop, the outer for loop, zero out total. And then inside the inner for loop, you say total plus equal score sub RC. Total plus equal score sub RC. And when the inner for loop is done, you have the total for that entire row. Now, you don't have the total for the entire contents of the two-dimensional array. This is just the total for one row. And then after that, you're going to do something with that total. Most of the time, what you're going to do is find the average for that particular student. So let's take it a step further. Let's find an average for a particular student. So you create total, and then just inside the outer for loop, you zero out total, and then you go inside the inner for loop and you accumulate total. And when you get to right here, you're actually done with one row. Now for that row, you figure out the average. Average is assigned total divided by 4, and then you display the average for that student. Average for student, so for the first row, 0 plus 1. Average for student 1 would be the actual average. If I were to make that a little bit bigger, there you go. And then what would happen? Well, then R would become 1. 1 is less than 3. You zero out total for the second guy. You accumulate all the scores for the second guy here inside this inner for loop. Then what happens is you find the second guy's average, and then you display the second guy's average. In which case now C would become 3, in which case R would become 2. 2 is less than 3, and you do it again for the third guy. You zero out total, you accumulate total, you figure out his average, and you display it. So totaling and doing an average is a very common practice when you're working with arrays, especially two-dimensional arrays. Please keep in mind, where exactly do we make total 0? When you're accumulating, you set total to 0 here, and inside the for loop, you will accumulate total. Now, if you want to use that total to create the actual average, remember, once again, you make total 0 outside the inner for loop, you accumulate total, and then after the inner for loop closes, after you've accumulated the total for one particular student, you create that particular student's average and you display it. Now I am still, this statement here and this statement here, these statements are inside the closing brace of the outer for loop. So basically this is how you work or manipulate data with a two-dimensional array.